Yeah, well, let's learn it and sing it, especially when we gather to pray. It's really a hymn that is echoing our hearts as we come to the throne of grace. Yeah, but often I said, well, since you singing that so low, why don't you do it tonight? Teach the people. See, when you get here, it's kind of different. Yeah. Nevertheless, we are glad to gather in the name of our Lord. Let's turn our attention to the book of First Peter. First Peter chapter 4. I'll read the first 11 verses. First Peter chapter 4, first 11 verses. For as much then as Christ hath suffered for us in the flesh, arm yourselves likewise with the same mind, for he that hath suffered in the flesh hath ceased from sin, that he no longer should live the rest of his time in the flesh to the lust of men, but to the will of God. For the time past of our life may suffice us to have wrought the will of the Gentiles, when we walk in lasciviousness, lust, excess of wine, revelings, banquetings, and abominable idolatries, wherein they think it strange that we run not with them to the same excess of riot, speaking evil of you, who shall give account to him that is ready to judge the quick and the dead. For this cause was the gospel preached also to them that are dead, that they might be judged according to men in the flesh, but live according to God in the spirit. The end of all things is at hand. Be ye therefore sober and watch unto prayer, and above all things have fervent love among yourselves, for love shall cover the multitude of sins. Use hospitality one to another without grudging, as every man hath received the gift, even so minister the same one to another as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. If any man speak, let him speak as the oracles of God. If any man minister, let him do it as of the ability which God giveth, that God in all things may be glorified through Jesus Christ, to whom be praise, dominion forever and ever. Amen. It's one of the passages that speak of spiritual gifts. There are four. There's Ephesians, there's 1 Peter 4, there's Corinthians, 1 Corinthians 12, and there's Romans chapter 12. Those passages speak of spiritual gifts in the church. But this evening I want to draw our attention to verses 1 and 2. For as much then as Christ hath suffered for us in the flesh, arm yourselves likewise with the same mind, for he that hath suffered in the flesh shall cease from sin. Though he that hath suffered in the flesh is not Christ, but us who have ceased from sin, the he that suffered in the flesh is Christ. But the he no longer should live the rest of his time in the flesh to the lust of man, but to the will of God is us. So if you would bring this Bible lesson tonight in the form of a question. How would you live the rest of your days? How would you live the rest of your days? You may say, I don't know. Or better yet, how should we live the rest of our days? Peter tells us. Some may say, I don't know. But we all have aspirations. Every one of you here have plans. I don't know if your plans include the Lord or the Lord's work. But I know we all have plans, and some may be hidden plans. So how should we live the rest of how should we spend the rest of our lives as the people of God? Peter tells us in this 4th chapter, as I always say, and I think I heard it today too, and I will reach across and said to Brother Ophni, I have that in my notes. Somebody's reading my notes. Servants of God do not retire. They don't look forward to retire. Well, some people ask me, Mark Carlson, how much longer do you think you minister at Cityville? What's going to happen when you're gone? Everybody seems to be concerned with that. But people of God, servants, do not retire. They just move to another phase of service. I always say also that my primary calling in this life is to be a Christian, not a pastor. And my desire is to be a faithful Christian and an example to my wife and anyone else who would listen. That's my calling. I would not want to live the rest of my life selfishly or aimlessly. As I address this question, how would you live the rest of your life? Peter gave us at least 3 attitudes we ought to have in living the rest of our time. Verse 1b and 2, for he that have suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin, that he no longer should live the rest of his time in the flesh for the lust of men, but for the will of God. Here's your answer. Jesus suffered in the flesh for sinners. He died the death that you and I should die. We live the life that he lived as Christians. This is not only academic, this is true. It may be just academic for some people, but the Apostle Peter gave 3 attitudes to show how to live the rest of our time as born-again Christians. Remember, I give you the birthmarks earlier, and by the way, I preached this message in Barbados on Pastor Ward, all 2. And most of us certainly will not live half of the years we have lived before, not even half. Men often die, some men often die young. There's a guy I was talking to with Jackie, I think it was last Lord's Day. A young man, a guy several years my junior, just went the way of all flesh. And the thing about it, he was a staunch athlete. People do not like to address end-of-life matters. They get very agitated when you begin talking about end-of-life matters. Going to the undertaker and telling him what you want and what you don't want and stuff like that. Dion asked if we did that yet. It is wise to think like that because it shows what your focus is on. So the question is, how would you spend the rest of your time? But let me get to the attitudes. The first attitude to have in living the rest of our time is to have a fighting attitude. A fighting attitude. For as much then as Christ has suffered for us in the flesh, arm yourselves likewise with the same mind. You know what it is to arm yourselves? Peter uses a military word to the Christian. Arm yourselves likewise with the same mind. It is a mental attitude to have. It is a mental fight to maintain. A Christian is not on a playing field in this world, but on a battlefield. And some of us don't understand that. From the time we wake up, whatever time it is, we are on a battlefield. The greatest battlefield is our mind. That's where the battle rages. We can lose the battle before we leave home. We should not step out unarmed. We should be armed. Does Diz
go on without you on your knees or in your Bible? Does days pass? We are to have the right mind, brethren.
I listened to Brother Depperdine carefully last Lord's Day evening. And
Here's a man that apparently has sensed his church, his congregation. I wish more would sense their congregation and their need, and the need of our congregation. Our congregation do not need any more lofty teaching. We have heard it. We have heard everything. We don't need any more information.
I don't think so. We are to have the right mind. Too many professing Christians
Play around with sin, pander to sin.
It was sin that brought the Lord to the cross. He suffered for us that we would not have
to suffer sin's consequence. I hope you understand that. Why toy with it?
Arm yourself. A fighting attitude, brethren, is not a hostile attitude towards others.
And some of you have a hostile attitude towards the brethren. I'm not talking about that. Sometimes you dare not ask someone going through the door a question about their spiritual lives. I told you I asked this lady and she almost took off my head. And some of you are like that. The minister of God is concerned about the soul of the people he's ministering to. You know, Charlie, you know these men just pour out their hearts and cry for the people. I hear Bart say today in his prayer that sometimes he has a disposition of hatred for some of his people, and pray that the Lord would give him a disposition of love. You heard that, Brother Othniel? I said, well, he feels just like me. Men of like passions. We should pray like that.
That God give us that disposition. A fighting attitude is not a hostile attitude towards one another, but a fighting attitude towards ourselves, towards our own sin. It's a mental attitude to have in this pilgrimage. You can't win if you don't step out every day with a fighting attitude against yourself and sin. You remember the aged Caleb, which we do some time ago in Joshua 14, when he demanded that mountain, Mount Ephraim. He said to Joshua, as yet I am as strong this day as on the day that Moses sent me. Just as my strength was then, so now is my strength for war, both for going out and for coming in. You know, Caleb was talking about the conquering of the land of Canaan, but it is a picture of conquering your own sin. Fight. A fighting attitude. Having a fighting attitude means that there will be less putting up with sin. You don't have to be hostile towards people. We will be contradicting sin. We will not condone sin, and some of us have a good way in condoning people's sin. We will crucify sin because the scriptures says that our Lord condemned sin in the flesh, that we no longer should obey the flesh. Romans 8, 3 and 4. How would you live the rest of your life in this world? By having a fighting attitude towards personal sin. Nobody have to know you have a fighting attitude. It's a mental thing. Pastor Brevard has this plaque in his study that says, I cannot lose a battle on my knees.
I like that. I took a snapshot of it a long time ago. He has it right there. And it shows that the best of us have to fight against our sin. You don't stand a chance if you don't have a fighting chance. If you and me were to follow the leading of our flesh, we would never amount to anything worthwhile spiritually. You hear what I say, Louise? If you and me were to follow the leading of our flesh, we would never amount to anything worthwhile spiritually. We would amount to something materially, but not spiritually. I fight myself to go over to Flemington this morning. We have at 6 o'clock this morning. I really take a shower at 6:30. I think it was yesterday evening I called Brother Hoffney because I told him I wasn't going. My disposition was, you was up and down all the time, stay at home. I fight myself to go there, to Flemington. But we come away saying it was worthwhile, not only for me and Brother Othniel, but for you. I went over there for you, the church. That's why I go over there, you know. I don't go over there for me. It was those men and it is those friendships that I have developed over the years that benefit you. I sacrificed the time for you, for the church. And as I say, some of you need to stop pandering to your flesh. Sacrifice Brother Korika for the brethren. I told Othniel, I don't want to come here today, but you see what happened? Even Brother Othniel's prayers. And you must pray longer here, like, oh, you pray over there. No quickie. I assured those pastors, because they comment about it, you heard them, were moved. You see, a layman praying for men in the ministry carries more weight than another man in the ministry praying for a fellow minister. Because it's coming from the pew for them. Men in tears. It was more profitable for you. We should contradict sin and don't condone. And you know what I'm talking about. So many of you condone sin. And that's where the argument always starts, when we condone sin. That is what caused the argument with me and you. How would you live the rest of your life in this world? Fighting. For he that hath suffered in the flesh hath ceased from sin, that he no longer should live the rest of his time in the flesh for the lust of men, as I said, but for the will of God. Peter is calling us to claim the victory of the cross. The words he and his in the text, the latter words, these words, does not refer to Christ, but to the one Christ died for. He suffered for us in the flesh, that we may no longer live the rest of the time in the flesh to the lust of men, but for the will of God. People always ask, what is the will of God for me? Well, here it is, a fighting attitude towards sin. Also goes on to say further in verses 3 through 5, he's showing us two things regarding the will of God. One is denouncing of the past. The other is the expectation from the world. And when I say the world, I am not referring to the people outside the church, because there are people in the church that are of the world. And I group them with the world. And sometimes when we hear the world, we cast our eyes on Flatbush Avenue. No, put them back here with people in the church who are still of the world. And most of the time, they are the ones that may be critical. But we are to denounce the past. Verse 3, for we have spent enough of our past lifetime, I read it from the New King James, in doing the will of the Gentiles, when we walk in lewdness, lust, drunkenness, revelries, drinking, parties, and abominable idolatries. This is the past. Doing the will of the Gentiles is not the will of God. Doing the Gentiles is not a word for the world. Doing the will of the Gentiles is living as the world lives. Peter named some of those awful things the world indulged in. The things that the new man will denounce. But the apostle tells us what to expect in verses 4 and 5, wherein they think it strange that ye run not with them to the same excess of riot, speaking evil of you, who shall give account to him that is ready to judge the living and the dead. And here again we see the certainty of judgment. God will judge sin. He will judge the sinner. That they who speak evil of us, the Christian, is the unconverted in the world that is in the church. And we must not think that these are vile people in society. They may be family members who see those who are true Christians to be strange. And indeed, believers are strange. Not odd, but strange to the heathen culture. Strange to the unconverted in the church. The apostle warns that these ones will give an account on the last day. How will you live the rest of your life? By having a fighting attitude towards sin. Second, by having a praying attitude. 6 and 7 is the second. 6 and 7. By having a praying attitude. Now, the word praying, I'm using it in the present tense. Praying always with all supplication and thanksgiving. For this cause was the gospel preached also to them that are dead, that they might be judged according to men in the flesh, but live according to God in the Spirit. Now, this verse has drawn many opinions by good students of the Bible. You do not preach the gospel to dead people in a cemetery. I heard some people say that, no, went and preach to dead people. That's not what it's saying. And it's poor hermeneutics. Brother Presley, you do not interpret the Bible like that. No, he went in no graveyard and preached to the dead people. The only boy who went in a graveyard and preached to the dead people is Ezekiel. And it was a picture of salvation. That's the dead that is in view. For this reason, the gospel was preached to those who are spiritually dead. You do not preach the gospel to dead people, but we preach the gospel to spiritually dead people in our church. Dead people cannot hear and see, therefore the unsaved in the church cannot hear and understand spiritual truths. But they are accountable. They will be judged according to men in the flesh, but live, if they're saved, according to God in the Spirit, if they become saved. That's the correct way to interpret that verse of Scripture. The only two outcomes that results from faithful gospel preaching. One is judgment, the other is eternal life. So how do we live the rest of our time? How do you want to live the rest of your time? By having a fighting attitude, by having a praying attitude, especially for the unsaved in your church. I hear Amos say today that he wished that some of his people would be able to befriend the unsaved in the church. He says some can do it, but some can't. And it's a wonderful thing that often you heard that. Because you hear me say the same thing too. You say the unsaved that come in here are relatives. What is our responsibility towards them? How was the picnic? How was the party? How was your grandchildren? Is that all? Is that as far as you can go as a Christian? How about the message? Did you understand it? Did you understand the applications the pastor made? We are too afraid of the lost in the church. I'm not afraid of them. You need to get with it. This is what we are seeking to do. The end of all things are at hand. Be therefore sober and watch, verse 7, unto prayer. Pray for ourselves. Peter says, watch unto prayer. Pray for ourselves. Pray for our people. But you got to watch. You can't pray if you don't watch. And I've been watching for a long time. You've been watching too. But are you praying? Are you praying for others? This is what we are seeking to do. We have a generation of young people that are far removed from the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ. The words of Peter should encourage us, be therefore sober and watch unto prayer. Peter uses the word sober also in 1 Peter 5:8. Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about seeking whom he may destroy or devour. Being sober doesn't mean being free of intoxication. That's not the way the word is used. It means to be saved. Be sober is to be saved. It's an evangelistic call. When we are spiritually sober, we will seek to pray for the lost ones, loved ones in our church. How do we live the rest of our time? By having a fighting attitude towards sin, by having a praying attitude towards others. Lastly, by having a loving attitude. By having a loving attitude. I've lost a whole page. I don't know where it is. Brother Colin, I hope you were sleeping back there. I got a page, another page, Colin, for me. Today I leave and I went all the way to Flemington, Brother Depot. When I get there, I had the Bible. I said, but often you see how it is going with me. What an embarrassment. A pastor show up to a pastor's prayer breakfast without a Bible. I says, Alan said, don't worry about it. That happened to me all the time. He says, you're going to get more like that. Yeah, but you don't want a whole page, I'm just missing. I don't know. So it means that I would not be able to complete the message. But having a loving attitude, I'll try my best. And above all things, have fervent love among yourselves. For love, you know what I think happened, Sister Jackie? I think the printer ran out of paper at this page, and that's why it didn't print. And if Colin going to pull, you're going to see that the printer ran out of paper. That's why. But I'm not bound by notes. I can finish. And above all things, have fervent love among yourselves, for love shall cover the multitude of sin. Peter did not say to have a fervent love for the world, but among yourselves. I think he used this phrase about 3 times, among yourselves. But have a fervent love among yourselves. One of the words that describe fervent is the word fanatic. Love covers a multitude of sin. Peter shows 4 ways how this fervent love is shown in the next 3 verses. And I probably would just close with this, in commenting about this. He shows 4 ways. how this love expresses itself. Use hospitality one to another without grudging. Pastor Panero, but often you must have said, I'm picking up all these phrases from today. Yes, because they are applications. And you can do that. You can make statements that other men, godly men, make in your message. Pastor Panero said he's renovating his house so that he can have a full study for visiting pastors, a full bedroom, a lounge, and a swimming pool for them. So this one guy, I think it was Josiah, said, "Do you have to apply for that?" So he says, "No. When pastors come from overseas, I want them to have a comfortable place. I want them to have a swimming pool, and I want them to have a study. But I am doing it for them." So I tell often, well, that's what you're supposed to do. That's what hospitality is, giving up your room for a pastor. You hear me say this all the time. I don't have to go to Flemington to hear it. That's why it's good to carry one of you sometimes, that you can hear these things for yourself. But Peter says, use hospitality one to another without grudging. As you and I have opportunity, be hospitable to your brethren. Open up your life. Open up your doors, man. Open up your kitchen. Sometimes you go and spend time with other men of God, and nowadays I travel with my coffee pot. You know, because I ain't want no cold cup of tea. I want a hot cup of coffee when I get it. Louise, buy a coffee mug, buy a coffee pot if you know it come in there. For me, Dion buy a new one, a new Kuznak. You know that coming. He needs coffee pot and a whole big, Mabel, a whole big Starbucks coffee. Like what is it, a 5-pound one? Oh, I'm gonna drink that mug of coffee in 3 days. I thought she was gonna give it to me to bring along, but she kept it. But what I'm saying is, brethren, part of love is hospitality one to another. Take him out. Take him to your house. Show him the town. Take him to a restaurant. You may end up spending $200, but pay it. Don't let the pastor do it all the time. You do it. You're showing love. Verse 10, as every man have received a gift, even so minister the same. Here's the phrase again, one to another, as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. Peter uses these words, one to another, to infer that love is horizontal in the church, like this, one to another. Sometimes I find that we are so unloving one to another, so unloving, so unkind. Man. Our gifts are to serve each other. How would you spend the rest of your time? By having a loving attitude. Let me read verse 11 again. 1 Peter 4, verse 11, I think this may be the last verse I would read. 1 Peter 4. Verse 11. If any man speak, let him speak as the oracles of God. If any man minister, this is referring to the diaconate. If any man minister, let him do it as of the ability which God giveth. You can't ask Miguel to preach a 3-point sermon. He's learning English. He served with the ability that God gave him, and you see him. You see him. You know, I spoke about him today to the pastors. I call his name and tell him what he does.
that God in all things may be glorified through Christ, to whom be praise and dominion forever and ever. That's why we do it, to the praise and to the glory of God. I wonder what is the goal of some men when they open the scriptures. If any man minister, if any man teach, what is your goal in doing that? Is it to glorify God? Or is it to attract others? What is your goal? 1 Peter 4 ends by answering the question concerning the will of God, that God in all things may be glorified through Christ Jesus, to whom be praise, dominion forever. How should I live the rest of my time? Or how do you want to live the rest of your time? By having a fighting attitude towards sin. Personal indwelling sin, outward sin that troubles us. Having a praying attitude one for another, and having a loving attitude towards the brethren. That's how I would want to live the rest of my time. And that's what you should want if you're a Christian. And that's what you should strive to do. This will glorify God. All the Apostle Peter is saying is to stop seeking to live for yourself and to live for the Lord. And this is how we are called to live the rest of our time. May God bless you. Amen. Our